King is alive. Sing with us. I raise a hallelujah in the presence of my enemies. Woo. I raise a hallelujah louder than the unbelief. Sing it. I raise a hallelujah. My weapon is a melody. I raise a hallelujah. Heaven comes to fight for me. I'm gonna sing in the middle of a storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roll. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive. Raise a hallelujah with everything inside of me. I raise a hallelujah. I will watch the darkness flee. I raise a hallelujah in the middle of the mystery. I raise a hallelujah. Feel your loss, your hold on me. I'm gonna sing in the middle of a storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roll. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive. Sing a little louder. Sing a little louder. Sing a little louder. Sing a little louder. Woo. Sing a little louder in the presence of my enemy. Sing a little louder, louder than the unbelief. Sing a little louder. My weapon is a melody. Sing a little louder. Heaven comes to fight for me. Sing a little louder. I'm gonna sing in the middle of a storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roll. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive. Woo. Welcome to Ripon Community Church. How you feeling this morning? I am so excited. I'm so excited because we have Mark Moore here today. Woo! And I was blessed to be able to have lunch with him on Friday. And we were talking about the significance of the book of Psalms. And I was reading this morning, Psalms 145. It says this. It says, "Great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. His greatness no one can fathom." And I just want to ask you to sing with us loudly on these next two songs. I know that you know them. And of course, gotta do "Great Are You, Lord."
darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord.
Sing it really loud. Here we go.
And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, great are you, Lord.
Don't you know this one? I was walking the west side, lost on a lonely road. I was chasing the high life, Will you pray with me? Lord, we're just so thankful. We're so thankful that we can sing praises to you, that you give life and you are love. And we just ask that you work through our hearts today and soften our hearts to the word today. We love you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Good morning. Welcome to Ripon Community Church. My name is Sam. I'm one of the pastors here. And it is, honestly, that was fun, wasn't it? Man, that was great. It's so fun to worship with you guys this morning, to be worshiping God together. That was awesome. I'm excited for you to be here this morning. It's my honor. I've had this coach for the last year. His name is Mark Moore, and he's here today. He's been a coach for the last year, and then also he's become a friend. We've hosted him and his wife, Barbara, for the last few days here in Ripon, and I think they like the town. I think it's a good town. They like Ripon. I can't blame them. It's a good place. But I'm super excited. Mark is from Phoenix, Arizona. He is the teaching pastor at Christ Church of the Valley, CCV there. It's one of the biggest churches in the country. He spent 22 years teaching at Ozark Christian as a professor there. He's an incredible wealth of information and a fantastic speaker. And it is my great honor to introduce to him today my friend Mark Moore. Would you give him a hand, please?
Thank you, buddy. You guys, you really have a treasure in Sam. I know you know that. In fact, Ripon is a treasure. My wife and I have been downtown in a hotel. Friday night was a free concert on the park. Last night, I go out to get pizza, and there's this like car show going up and down the road. It's just a sweetness. And Sam and I got to talking at lunch on Thursday, or on Friday. This is a smaller town. You know that. Phoenix is the 5th largest city in America, 4.5 million people. Our church is like, I don't even want to tell you how big it is. It's stupid big. It's like stupid big. And on one of we have 12 campuses. On one of our campuses, it's twice the size of this town. And he said, well, our church isn't that big. But we don't measure the size of our church based upon the number of people who come. We measure the size of the church based upon the number of people who don't come. We talk about market share, and our church has 0.5% market share of the Phoenix metro area. You know what market share you guys have here? It's like 20%. Yeah. What you're doing in this location to God's glory is extraordinary. If you measure the impact you're having, it's extraordinary. So thanks, Sam, thank you for having me. I know that he's just finished a series through the book of Acts. Love that book. And so I thought I would come and give you a character sketch of someone barely mentioned in the book of Acts that would kind of set the stage for the emotions, the people, the characters that are behind the scenes. Is that okay with you? The person I want to talk about is John Mark. And since my name is Mark, I thought I could just act like I am John Mark. And scene. He was in my house. He was in my house. Not a lot, but whenever he came to town, he knew he had an open table. In fact, the last time he came, it wasn't just an open table. We gave him the entire upper room. And he brought the boys in, and they packed the upper room. I was in my late teens at the time, and man, I wanted to be up there. Mom didn't let me. So I just sat downstairs, eavesdropping. I couldn't hear everything he said. It was a long night. But when they raised their voices, I could catch phrases. And one of the phrases I caught was, Peter, what a knucklehead. He said, if you don't wash my feet, Jesus said, if I don't wash your feet, you won't have any part to do with me. And Peter said, well, then wash my whole body. It was hilarious. Even downstairs, it was hilarious. I could sense, though, through the murmurs through the ceiling, that there was a serious discussion going on. Like something was heavy, like a dense fog in the room. And then I heard one set of footprints going down the stairs. I didn't know who it was. It was just one person, and they left. I assumed that they were going out to get some more supplies for the Passover meal. No. A while later, I heard all of the other 12 footsteps, Jesus and the 11 apostles. They went down the stairs, and I was pretty sure I knew where they're going because we had hosted them there before. It was our olive grove on the Mount of Olives. It's an enclosed area, had a fence, private place to pray. Jesus loved that spot. So did we. And a few minutes later, I heard this banging on the door. It was an angry bang. And when Mom and I opened the door, I could have killed him. I knew instantly who the single set of footsteps were earlier. Because it's scary, it was standing right there asking for Jesus of Nazareth. And behind him, get this, 600 Roman soldiers. I thought, you coward, you traitor. I could have killed him. But there's nothing that I could do with an armed entourage behind him. So they asked, where is he? And of course, my mom, Mary, she said, how would I know? He left. But we all knew where he was. And I had to wait until 600 soldiers cleared the street. Now, if you've been to my house, you would know the streets are only about 8 feet wide. And so 600 soldiers, that takes a long time for them to march around the very last corner. But as soon as the last soldier left, I made a beeline for the garden. Now, I couldn't obviously go the quickest route, because that's the route Iscariot was taking. He knew where he was too. I had to take the long way around, and by the time I got to the garden, I could see from a distance, about from me to you, I could see from a distance, he embraced Jesus as if he was a friend and kissed him on both cheeks. I wanted to kill him, but I wasn't close enough. Peter was. And he couldn't get to Iscariot because he backed into the shadows. But he pulled out this butcher's knife. I assume it was the one they carved the Passover lamb. He had it tucked in his belt. And Peter took a swipe at Malchus. Now, all he got was his ear. That's not where he was aiming. He was trying to give Malchus a haircut at the collarbone. But Malchus was just quicker, and he just flipped. Caught his ear, it went in the air and landed in the dust. By that time, I was close enough to hear Jesus say, arms pinned behind his back, he said, permit me this. For whatever reason, they did. And with his arms freed, he reached down and picked up the ear and snapped it back on like a Lego block. I kind of felt sorry for the soldiers because they had to actually take his arms again and pin them behind his back. Now, when you start pinning a guy's arms behind his back that snaps on body parts, how do you know he's not going to take some of yours off? And Jesus said to Peter, Peter, put that thing away. You're going to put someone's eye out. If you live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. Which honestly was okay with us. We were ready to lay our lives down for Jesus. Little did we know that he was about to lay his down for us. And when Jesus took away from us the only weapon we knew how to use, we felt so helpless. Everybody ran. I was stunned at first, because I had just gotten there. I didn't have time to adjust. And in fact, I got there so quickly, I didn't even have time to put my jacket on. All I was wearing was a tunic. It was linen. Yes, we were a wealthy family. I had nothing on underneath it. And when all of the apostles fled, scattered like cockroaches in the night, I was standing there and I felt this heavy hand of a soldier on my shoulder. He grabbed a bit of my garment and I was quicker than he was. I slipped right out of it and I ran naked. Not buck naked. I had a loincloth on, but the reason I'm telling you that is my nakedness, my exposure was a metaphor for his. I left my Lord all alone. And scene. That story, I've made up a few of the details. But basically, it is a historical reconstruction of 2 verses out of the book of Mark. Mark, he doesn't name himself in the story, but who else would know about a streaker in a private garden? Who else would care about a streaker. And now, if you're the one naked, you feel it more acutely, I assume. But verse 50, this is Mark chapter 14. It says, "Then all the disciples deserted him and ran away. One young man following behind was clothed only in a long linen shirt. When the mob tried to grab him, he slipped out of his shirt and ran away naked." That was failure number one for the young John Mark. Now, I can relate to that because I've had a few failures in my younger years where I've done some things that I'm even too ashamed to bring up right now. Anyone else? Young, stupid men. Ladies, I just assume that you're perfect. But for you dudes, I know your biography. You've done a few dumb things that you don't want your kids to find out about. That's just the nature of a young man. But his mistakes were not from a bad heart. His intentions were good. His execution was poor. And if you fast forward, you'll read another story of John Mark. This is really interesting to me. It's from the book of Acts, chapter 12, verse 25. Maybe you remember it as Sam processed through this book. This is the only verse in all the New Testament where you read the word mission. And we think about missions like your youth pastor just got back from Honduras. That's how we think of missions. This is the only description of mission. When Barnabas and Saul had finished their mission to Jerusalem, their mission was to go back home and provide resources for poor people. They returned, and this is almost a throwaway line, taking with them John Mark. So this young guy who's made a mistake already, he's already been naked in the garden. They take him along. Later we'll learn that John Mark was a relative of Barnabas. We'll just call him a cousin. And so they brought John Mark back to Antioch. Antioch it's a fabulous place. It's in the southern tip of Turkey today. It was the first place they called people Christians because they didn't know what to call them in this church. It was the first multi-ethnic. It was the first church that crossed economic lines. It was the first group that crossed gender lines. They had male, female, rich, poor, slave free, all in one building. And so nobody knew what to call them, so they just called them Christ followers. And the church is growing fast and hard. And so as they're growing, a guy named Barnabas, you need to know about Barnabas, that's his nickname, not his real name. It means son of encouragement. And often we think of a son of encouragement as someone who's kind and nice and like a little soft. No, not Barnabas. This guy he's got some chutzpah to him. He actually took the Saul, before he became the Apostle Paul, Saul of Tarsus, the ex-persecutor, new convert. When he returned to Jerusalem after his conversion, no one would touch him. You wouldn't either. Like if you're a widow and he was responsible for you being a widow, Saul had killed Christians. There were orphans because of him in the church, and no one would touch him except Barnabas. Barnabas takes Saul and brings him into these house churches. He now knows where you live. He knows the names of your children. That's what Barnabas did. And when Barnabas was called to this church of Antioch, he said, I need help. So who does he get? Saul and John Mark. Couple of losers, but man, did they build a team. It says in verse 5, chapter 13, verse 5, they're in the town of Salamis. They've been called by the Holy Spirit. We want you to go on a mission, actually crossing a geographic line. And they go over to Cyprus. That's where Barnabas had some property, probably some family inheritance. They're in the town of Salamis. They went to the Jewish synagogues and preached the word of God. John Mark went with them as their assistant. Now, I don't know if he was the youth pastor. I don't know if he was the baggage handler. He's just glad to be included in the team because these are like big names, Barnabas and Saul. And he's still going by Saul, by the way. And notice it's Barnabas and Saul, not Paul and Barnabas. That would come later. In fact, it would come at the other end of the island. They go to a city called Paphos, and they met a guy there who was a big deal. It's called a proconsul. Think of it as a governor, like a state governor. And Saul is preaching. And there was a dude there named Bar Jesus, the son of Jesus. He's not acting like Jesus. He was a magician, kind of a political counselor, which you can fill out your own jokes about that. He's advising Sergius Paulus about how to administrate the area. And when Saul begins preaching about Jesus, Bar Jesus says, I think my job's in jeopardy. And so he starts to oppose them and speak against them. And you're not going to believe what Saul did. You remember what Jesus did to Saul when he was converted? Struck him blind. And so Saul turns to this guy who's opposing him, and Jesus struck Saul blind, and now Saul strikes Bar Jesus blind and says, you won't be able to see. And you should have been there. It's hilarious. He's like groping around he's blind. He's trying to find his way. And everyone else is like playing Marco Polo with this guy, like, don't let him touch me because I don't know if it's contagious. It was at that moment that Sergius Paulus converted to Christ. The biggest convert Saul had ever had up to that moment. It was a big deal. Like the governor of the state comes to Jesus. And it was at that point that Saul went by his Greek name, Paul. Now, you know him as the Apostle Paul, right? He wasn't always the Apostle Paul. It was at this moment. And something else happened. Luke is very careful with the order of names, and he switched the order. Instead of Barnabas and Saul, it became Paul and Barnabas. I think that's part of why John Mark left. And you read it in verse 13, where it says, Paul and his companions then left Paphos by ship for Pamphylia. That's across a body of water. They're now in Turkey. It's filled with bandits. It's filled with malaria. And John Mark bugs out. Landing at the port town of Perga, there John Mark left them and returned to Jerusalem. Why? I don't know. I would speculate that he's homesick, but my guess is also he went on the road trip because his cousin Barnabas was leading it. And when they switched leaders and Paul took over, Barnabas or John Mark probably thought, I don't know, I'm not in for that. And he just went home. Paul was furious. In fact, if you fast forward to chapter 15, you'll read about an argument that took place between Barnabas and Paul the apostle. Verse 36, after some time, Paul said to Barnabas, let's go back and visit each city where we previously preached the word of the Lord to see how the new believers are doing. And Barnabas thought, that's a great idea. He agreed and wanted to take along John Mark. But Paul disagreed strongly since John Mark had deserted them. The Greek word for that is apostatized in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in their work. Their disagreement was so sharp that they separated. Barnabas took John Mark with him and sailed for Cyprus. Now, I wasn't there, so I don't know exactly how the argument went. My guess is it was something like this. Barnabas, Paul, let's go visit the churches. Remember all the churches we planted? Let's go see how they're doing. I've been thinking a lot about them. That's a great idea, Barnabas. We should go back. And I got a great idea. Let's take John Mark with us. John Mark, are you out of your mind? He abandoned us. He got homesick. No, he apostatized. What are you talking about apostatized? He was a young man. He got homesick. He went home, and he's good to go. I am not taking a risk on a young man who is unreliable. You mean you're not going to take a risk on him like I took on you? There would be no Paul if it wasn't for me. I don't care about that. I'm not taking a risk on him. Then you're not going with it. No, you're not going with me. All right, we'll go our different ways. Or something like that. I gotta feel. Don't you feel sorry for John Mark? Because he's like wide-eyed going, I think I just caused the divorce of the first missionary trip in history. I know what that feels like. My guess is that some of you men do too. I had a mentor, this was 2005. We had traveled to Russia together to do mission work. We had traveled to Amman, Jordan together to do mission work. He was a mentor of mine. But in Jordan, I said something to a third party. It wasn't even about him, but what I said was so offensive to him that he stopped talking to me. I didn't even know I'd offended him. And when I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. And when I learned what it was, I went and tried to apologize. He stopped taking my phone calls. He wouldn't have lunch with me. Like, our relationship was over. Maybe we'll reconcile in heaven. Bob's gone to be with the Lord, but I know how it feels to offend someone you didn't even mean to. And some of you know that pain as well. Small town, gossip gets around. And when you see them on Main Street, you kind of cross to the other side. You can't work together. Maybe you can't even worship together. That's a painful way to live your life. Here's what I want to say to you. All of us have a bit of John Mark in us. All of us. And my suspicion is, if your church is like every other church I've ever been in, there are some really good men and really good women sitting on the sideline because of something in your rearview mirror. I get the pain. I know that. I know the disappointment of letting someone down. I know about broken relationships. But here's what I also know. There are people in this town who need to know Jesus. And you're their best hope for meeting him. They don't know Sam. They don't know the leaders of this church. They're not going to come to Christ because we have great worship here. They're going to come to Christ if you lead them to Christ. And if you don't get past your past, there's a lot of people who don't have a future. So I don't just want to talk about Act 1, Scene 1 and 2. I want to go to Act 2 of Mark's life. Not the failures in his life, but the successes. So let's go back to the book of Acts, chapter 12. There's this little description there about Peter, another apostle, different story. Peter has been put in prison. Actually, James was put in prison first by Herod Agrippa I. And when Herod saw that the Jews loved it when James was put in prison, he cut off his head. And they loved it even more. So he grabbed another apostle, Peter, put him in prison. And in the morning, it's like weeks away, in the morning, Peter's going to die. His execution is scheduled. You know what he's doing? Sleeping. Think about that. You're going to die in the morning, but you have so much confidence in the Lord that you're sleeping like a baby. In fact, you can't make this up. This is why you need to read the Bible. The angel comes in and actually kicks him in the side to wake him up. That's the spiritual gift of sleeping. I've got it. Trust me. Peter gets up. He thinks it's a dream. He's been chained to two soldiers. The chains have dropped to the floor miraculously. He walks to the door, and the door opens automatically. That's before automatic doors at grocery stores. And Peter's going, this is a good dream. I like it. And he walks into the cool night, wakes him up, and he gets to the street of Mary's house. You know who Mary's son was? John Mark. This is John Mark's house. And he knocks on the door. He's the middle of the night. He now realizes, I'm a fugitive. So he doesn't want to wake the neighbors. The guard at the gate was a teenage girl named Rhoda. Actually, fact check me, her name's in there. Why would you have a teenage girl be the guard at the gate? Curious? Because God gave teenage girls two gifts that make them perfect for this job description. Gift number one, so they don't have to fight. They just have to warn the house. So you need two gifts that all teenage girls seem to have. Number one, you can stay up late at night, like all night long. And you can scream really loudly. So she's perfect for the job. Peter knocks on the door, and she goes, who is it? And he says, it's Peter. It sounds like Peter. And she runs into the house and goes, Peter's at the door, Peter's at the door. The door's still locked. She is a ditzy teenage girl. And Peter's like, I'm a fugitive. So they open the door and they go, Peter! And they go, shut up. He motioned them to be silent, to quiet down, and he told them how the Lord had led him out of prison. He said, tell James and the other brothers what happened, he said. And then he went to another place. You know what the other place was? Yeah, I don't either. Like no historian knows where it is. I'm going to take a guess. I think it was Rome. We know Peter wound up in Rome, St. Peter's Basilica and all. And you know who he took with him? John Mark. Now imagine this, a young man who has failed on a mission. He comes back home, tail between his legs. He's feeling a bit beat up. He's lost a mentor and a friend. But another mentor comes along and takes him under his wing. You know what John Mark did in Rome? This is Act 2, Scene 1. He wrote a book. You know what the book is? Anyone? Go ahead, say it out loud if you know. Mark. Yeah, Mark never identifies himself in the book except that anonymous tidbit of the streaker. But let me tell you something about the Gospel of Mark. Most scholars, myself included, believe that Mark was the very first gospel written. And you may not know this, but the word gospel is not a religious word. It was a political term. It was a public announcement of something that happened, and almost always the good news or gospel was about the emperor or a general. Good news, the general won the war. Good news, the emperor had a child. We now have an heir to the throne. Good news, good news. Mark was the first to ever use gospel for Jesus. And he doesn't use it in a religious sense. For him, this is a political terminology, and I can prove it to you. Chapter 1, verse 1, the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Now, you think Son of God is a religious term. No, it's a political term. That's what they called their emperors. You think Christ is a religious term. Nope, it's a political term. The Jews, the Hebrew term is Mashiach or Messiah. That's what they called their kings. So he's identifying for everybody in Rome, good news, good news. And they're thinking a political, a general won a war, or the emperor had a child. No, he's talking about the emperor's emperor, the king of kings, Jesus Christ. The Christ, all the Jews go, yep, we know what that means. He's king. Son of God. All the Romans say, yep, I know what that means. He is the emperor. Mark is like a bodacious young cuss. Can you imagine the chutzpah that this kid has in Rome to say to the Romans that your emperor is not your true king? There's one above him. Oy vey. And what he did, every other Christian imitated. The Romans, when they talked about good news, even if it was a singular battle, they used the plural. Good newses. Even if it was a singular child of the emperor, it's good newses. Why? Because there will be more emperors and more battles. Mark used gospel in the singular. Because there will be no more good news after this. This is all the good news you'll ever need. You gotta love the young buck Mark. Act 2, Scene 2. Fast forward to the end of like 68, 67 AD. Peter is going to be crucified upside down. Paul is going to be beheaded, both in the same city and both by the same Emperor Nero. But I want you to hear what Peter said about John Mark at the end of his life. Your sister church here in Babylon, that's a code for Rome, sends you greetings, and so does my son, Mark. My son, Mark. That's not bad. For a young guy who had a few mistakes in his younger years, that's not bad. This is really good. 2 Timothy, this is chapter 4. I've actually been in the dungeon where Paul wrote this. It's at the head of the forum in Rome, the political capital of the world. And Paul, in the dungeon, can hear the footsteps of the Roman soldiers. The next time he sees the light of day, he will walk to his execution on the Ostian Way. But in that dungeon, the dank winter, he writes these words, "Only Luke is with me. Bring Mark with you when you come, for he will be helpful to me in my ministry." And someone today needs to hear that. Your past does not have to determine your future. When I was preparing for this sermon, I made a discovery that I'd never seen before in the Gospels. Like I was Googling in my Bible software John Mark, and there's some verses that didn't show up. Like I knew there was these verses about John Mark, but John Mark, it didn't show up in the search. So I just typed in John, and some of them showed up. And then I just typed in Mark, and some of them showed up. In other words, early in his life, when he was a kid, he was called John Mark, John Mark. When he failed, he was called John. But after Barnabas took him under his wing, Acts 15, he is never called John again. He is only called Mark. And what's that mean? Barnabas changed his name. And Mark, because of his behavior, changed his name. No one ever called him by his old name again. He wasn't John. He wasn't John Mark. He was Mark. And it reminds me of another Mark, Mark Hostetler. I know you don't know him. He was a student of mine, 20 years ago. He was an impressive young man, John Mark. Mark Hostetler. He and his brother, they were identical twins, and they lived in a small town in Kansas. Coming up, let's get this started. He and his brother, they were part of a family that was kind of disrespected in their small town in Kansas. The Hostetler name was a negative name in that part of Kansas because their father drank too much, slept with too many women, and owed too many people money. Anyone know anything like that in Ripon? Mark and his brother were hellions as teenagers. Single mom could not control them. So she took the boys and sent them to a group home because they're out of control. In that group home, they found Jesus. And at 17 years old, the two of them, about the age of Mark in the upper room, the two of them said, the Hostetler name, by the time we are men, is going to be a good name in our town. So they set to living a life that would be of service to others, would honor God, would build health in the town. I've known him for 20 years, and I can tell you that in 20 years, I've never heard the Hostetler name in a negative light. Some of you need to change your name. You need to change the reputation of your family. And it starts here by meeting Jesus. And it has ripple effects through Ripon. I know that, man, sometimes going through life is like walking through a fire. There's smoke, there's flame, there's ashes. I know that some of you are going through a fire right now, a fire of divorce or a fire of mental health, a fire of loneliness or abandonment. But you also know that you don't walk through the fire alone. There's someone who walks with you. And you know that out of the ashes, Jesus can build something beautiful. So I want to give you an opportunity to sing this song with us. In fact, I'm not going to finish this sermon. You're going to finish it by singing this song of walking through the fire. Why don't you stand together and finish this sermon declaring the truth of God. You can change your name and you can change your city.
I remember how you told me life may not be easy, and everything I need you've already given me. I remember how told me I can trust you completely. So why am I doubting? Letting you prove that you fight for me. You walk me through fire. You hold me from flame. You're in this with me. I won't be afraid. When the smoke billows higher, going higher, it feels like I can barely breathe. Walk through these fires, 'cause you're walking with me. I'm changed by your mercy, covered by your peace. I'm living out the victory. Doesn't mean I won't feel the heat. Sing with me, here we go. You walk me through fire. You pull me from flames. You're in this with me. I won't be afraid. When the smoke billows higher, going higher, it feels like I can barely breathe. Walk through these fires, 'cause you're walking with me. I can face anything, 'cause you're here with me. I can do all things, 'cause you strengthen me. I remember how you showed me the price of my redemption. Lord, how could I question? You prove that you died for me. You walk me through fire. You pull me from flames. You pull me from flames. You're in this with me. I won't be afraid. Won't be afraid. The smoke billows higher, going higher. It feels like I can barely breathe. Walk through these fires. You're walking with me. Walk through these fires, 'cause you're walking with me.
Good God Almighty, I hope you'll find me praising your name no matter what comes. 'Cause I know where I'd be without your mercy. So I keep praising your name at the top of my lungs.
Can't count the times I called your name some broken night. You showed up and patched me up like you do every time. I You see your love goes on forever, that your mercy never stops. So why would I assume you'll be somebody that you're not? Like sun in the morning, I know you're gonna be there every day. So what on earth would make me be afraid?
Afraid.
Good God Almighty, I hope you'll find me praising your name no matter what comes. 'Cause I know where I'd be without your mercy. I keep praising your name at the top of my lungs. Tell me, is he good? He's good. Tell me, is he God? He's God. He is good God Almighty. Praise him in the morning, praise him in the noontime, praise him when the sun goes down. Love him in the morning, love him in the noontime, love him when the sun goes down. Good God Almighty, I hope you find me praising your name no matter what comes. 'Cause I know where I'd be without your mercy. So I keep praising your name at the top of my lungs. Tell me, is he good? He's good. Tell me, is he God? He's God. He is good God Almighty. Jesus in the morning, Jesus in the noontime, Jesus when the sun goes down. Jesus in the morning, Jesus in the noontime, Jesus when the sun goes down.